Welcome to Happy Talks with Dr. Alice and Donovan. Dr. Alice Fong is a holistic naturopathic doctor and founder of Amour de Soi Wellness, and Donovon Jenson is a software engineer and founder of HowToHappy.com. Together, they're out to cause more happiness in the world.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Happy Talks. My name is Dr. Alice, and this is Donovan. And today we're going to talk about how to deal with burnout. Yeah, so we just got through a pretty rough 2020. It's been a rough year for a lot of people in a lot of different ways. So we might be feeling burnout and tired and fatigued and exhausted. So Donovan, what are your thoughts on, what we should do about burnout when we're feeling just really,
Yeah, so to me, there's kind of two different scenarios or two different paths to like burnout or positions that you can start from. And one is basically where probably most people are right now, which is they have some amount of extra fatigue or weight or stress or whatever else that has built up over a long period of time, right? So it's like up to this boiling or breaking point where it's like, oh man, I'm so close to being burnt out. And we can talk about that in a little bit. And then I think there's this other path or position of like, I'm just in this thing or starting this thing, or maybe I've been in it for a while and I don't want to become burned out. So I think those are like the two different pieces, right? Whether like how far along the burnout spectrum you already are. And I think the paths or the options or the choices that you can take to reduce burnout or to mitigate it depend on which piece you're in. So I'm going to keep rambling for a second, but before I do, I'd be curious which one you want to start talking about first.
I'm okay with either way. I could talk about both, but when I think of burnout, it's like the cumulative effect of just a lot of stress, and then another thing happens, and then another thing happens, and then you're just like so depleted, like you've depleted your cup, so there's nothing left to give, kind of a thing.
Yeah, so let's start with the probably more common case right now, which is you are burnt out or very close to being burnt out. And I think, again, the degree matters, right? Just how intense it is. But basically, let's start with how do you get there in the first place? And it's like you were saying, there's all these events, there's all these things that build up, and there's not an equivalent release function, right? There's hey, we're locked inside all day, every day. Hey, my job is potentially on the line. Hey, like, I don't know how I'm going to make ends meet. Hey, this thing. And it's generally spread out across time, right? It's not like one tough month or one tough week. It's months and months and months of things building up. And off the top of my head, maybe there's more things to think about, but really the first thing I think of is just like taking a break, finding some way to get some space. And that's not always an option, but I think if it is, that's the fastest and clearest path to restoring some kind of balance. And I also think, I've personally gone through this in the last little bit of feeling this high level of burnout, but also feeling like I can't take a break. But in reality, at least for my situation, I could. I just felt like I couldn't for whatever reason. So, it depends for what people are facing, but that might be the very, very first thing to look at is, can you actually take a break? And really getting serious, I guess, or really getting clear on, maybe you don't want to take a break, but can you give yourself some space? Because this high level of burnout, if you keep the same level of activities and things that you need to do, responsibilities, et cetera, it's going to be really hard to find the space to build new habits that allow you to exist functionally moving forward. Okay, that's enough rambling. I'm done. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, no, I agree that, I think it's this mental block that people have in thinking that I got to keep going. There's no time to stop. But they don't realize that if you're like constantly running like a hamster in a wheel, that you're going to not run. You're going to start walking and crawling, and then you're like barely getting any outputs out. You're still producing maybe a little of, or getting some things done. But if you actually got off that hamster wheel and rested for what you needed to rest and then got back on, then you could just go back to running and actually maybe even produce even more. Or like if you were to use like animals as an example, like, yeah, maybe you're a cheetah normally, But if you're running, you're gonna eventually slow down and then be tired and then not really run very fast. And if you just like took a little breather, took a nap, or just like got out and got some fresh air, that might restore you enough to be able to run again, instead of just being like a tortoise, just going at a super, super slow pace. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I definitely get it. Without going into too much detail, I was in a position earlier this year or earlier last year.
Mhm.
New year. Anyway,
You
I was
care.
in a position
Yes.
where I couldn't see it at the time,
Mhm.
but I was basically so burnt out and tired and exhausted that it was taking me a week to do something that I could usually do in half a day.
Mhm.
And it's only, in the rear view that I can see so clearly
Mhm.
how bogged down I was. But then, maybe that's another thing to look at is how is your level of burnout or your just general mood
Mhm.
affecting your ability to produce? Obviously, it doesn't feel awesome as well.
Yeah.
But you may look at kind of your historical output and see
Mhm.
a huge disparity, because part of what was making me in that time go, oh, I just have to keep pushing forward. I have to do it, was
Right.
thinking like, oh, I'm keeping up, I'm getting enough done,
Mhm.
I'm making progress. But in
Right.
retrospect, that was not true at all. And
Mhm.
had I compared it to what I was able to produce or where I was at before, I would have seen a huge gap. Not to mention, just my general affect and my quality of life was much lower than normal. So I think that's a really good point, is to recognize how much these feelings can impact your productivity.
Mhm. Absolutely. Yeah, it kind of reminds me about when I was in medical school. I don't know if I shared this story before, but I'm gonna share it again. But yeah, when I was in medical school, my first year, I remember in my second quarter, I had like 9 finals in that week. And so I literally was like cramming my ass off, like up till super late. I'm getting 4 hours of sleep, just like trying to like study hard. And I didn't even realize, like, if I study past a certain time period, like nothing is really going in to my brain. It's just like making me more tired. And ultimately, I didn't really do that well on my finals. And that was kind of disappointing. And not only that, I ended up being sick for a week in bed for my spring break. So that's how I spent my spring break, because I had just like pushed my body to the edge and beyond, and just my body couldn't handle it. I was just like so burnt and tired. I was living off rock star energy drinks, and it just wasn't a good situation. And so like the next quarter, I realized, I really need to be better about time management. I really need to get enough sleep. I really need to practice mindfulness, and that turned everything around. I wouldn't study past 10 p.m. I was like, set a hard stop. Sleep is the bigger priority. I need at least, 7 hours of sleep. 4 hours is definitely not sufficient for me. And yeah, I started taking care of myself, eating better, and just being, especially time management, super huge. Stop procrastinating, be better about managing my time. But yeah, it made such a difference. I performed infinitely better on my finals in my last quarter than I did in my second quarter, where I just did it terribly. And it just made me think, it's like, oh yeah, self-care, so important, so critical. And it's hard because you're like, you want to do the best that you can, so you want to keep going. You don't realize that can actually set you back and actually perform worse. So I think it's a really important reminder to remember that it's, don't feel guilty. It's necessary, that it's a necessary part of survival to take breaks, to slow down, to sleep, to get rest, to eat well. Like that's important, so you can keep running and running.
Yeah, and I think it gets into the core of kind of timelines, right?
Yeah.
Uh, there are certain situations and there are certain projects or whatever that you can push a little harder on for a while. The
Yeah.
problem becomes, and I think this is very common,
Mhm.
when that, one time push starts making its way into, oh, this is just how I live now. And
Right.
I
Yeah.
think, finding that balance is one of the ways, going back to kind of the two pieces I talked about before, to mitigate burnout before it starts developing, is recognizing what's actually realistic and when those trade-offs make sense. because it doesn't make sense very often to make those trade-offs of like self-care and other things. And it definitely doesn't make sense to do that consistently. And I know that's where I was, right? I was at a point where I was trying to cram every waking minute with something productive and zero downtime. And that might work for a short period. You may want to really push through on something and make it happen. But when you extend that over months, over years, at some point you're going to have to pay the price of all that fatigue and all that buildup and all that lack of kind of funneling the stress somewhere or relieving it in some way. So I think that was a really good, segue into that topic. I'd be curious if you have any ideas for, because it sounds like both of us kind of walked all the way down the path to burnout and then had a bad experience and then figured out how to do these things. So I'd be curious if you have any ideas for like, how can we maybe notice these things before we're already having a very bad time?
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good question. And just before I get into that, I just want to like add on to what you were saying about, it is okay to have like those instances once in a while. Yeah, sometimes there's this urgent deadline, but when you start to notice that it's like a reoccurring theme in your life where everything seems like life or death situation deadline, that's where we need to take a step back. And it's like, is really anyone going to die if I don't meet this deadline? And that's a really important question, I think, to evaluate for yourself, because if you're always treating every situation like life or death, someone could die, then it's like your body is in this fight or flight mode, and that leads to a lot of health issues. It not decreases your focus, it decreases your motivation, your energy, it decreases your immune function. It just makes you cranky and grumpy. And so I think like adding to what, your question about, what do you do about that? It's like, first start to notice and become aware of when you're not being a pleasant person. Because when I'm tired and not getting enough sleep, yes, I try to start to be a little shorter with people. I'm grumpier with people. I'm not so happy and cheery as I know I typically am. So that's a key sign of like, okay, something's off about me. What's going on? What's going on with me that's making me like this unpleasant person to be around? And do I want to live this way? No, I don't. So clearly, what do I need for myself is time for me. And that's what happens too. It's like, I'm someone that's always giving. I like to help people and I'm always helping people, but I have to also realize I need to set boundaries and step back sometimes when I'm feeling like, if I feel I love helping people, but if I notice that I feel grumpy about helping someone, I'm like resenting that they asked for something from me, then I know I'm like, that's not usually me. That just means I need some time for me to like recover so I can give more. Otherwise, that's not who I know myself to be. So I want to be someone who is giving, but not to the point of like depleting myself where I can't give to anyone anymore. And then the other thing as far as burnout goes is to just like let go of the guilt. We've talked about this in a previous episode of just not feeling bad about taking time for you, and that, if these people that love you and care about you and you want to give to them, and you don't give them what they need, if they really love you and care about you, they want you to take care of yourself. They don't want you to be a miserable grump, probably, most likely. Maybe they don't care, but if they really love and care about you, they want you to be like happy generally. So, taking some time, and maybe that requires communication on your part to tell them, hey, this is all the things that's going on in my life. I know you have like this picture and you want me to help you, and I want to help you. But just to paint the picture, this is all that's going on in my life. I've got way too much on my plate, and I really need to like say no for now. Okay, I love you, but no for now, kind of a thing. So communicating rather than just taking it on and resenting the person for asking for another thing. It's like if you just communicated, they get like, oh, I didn't even realize you have that much on your plate. I think that's key and critical. And that's obviously a reoccurring theme in all our episodes, always comes back to communication. But yeah, I think those are good starting points. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think that brings out kind of I'm basically just going to echo what you said in a slightly different way, but it brings out two nice things for me. One is if you start to notice either emotional or behavior differences that are not who you want to be or out of the ordinary for you, that's probably one red flag that you may be on the path to burnout. And that also, I think, you can see most clearly in your relationships, right? If your relationships start suffering in a way that is related to the way that you're acting or feeling or thinking or whatever else, I think that's a really good place to hone in on and do some more searching to see what's going on. The other piece of that that I wanted to add on is I think actually our relationships are a great way to test where and how we're burnt out as well. And by test, I just mean like asking other people, right? Are you seeing me, like, how well do you think I'm dealing with stress? Where do you think I'm at? And obviously this is for our relationships that are deep and we feel comfortable having these sorts of conversations, not just, talking to your boss, like, do I seem like I have it together? Maybe not quite the right time. But something in that realm of just getting some extra input from outside sources, because like we kind of talked about a little bit, I think it can be hard sometimes in the moment until it gets up to a point where it's a problem to see the effect it's having on you. But I know for me, like while I was going through that period, other people were saying like, you are not balancing things well. You are way too stressed out. And it wasn't quite enough for me at the time. I wish that it was, to break me out of kind of the habits or the expectations I had for myself. But I think that's a really good resource. The other piece that I wanted to talk about that kind of came up is really prioritizing what actually needs to get done. I know that for me, and I think you mentioned it as well, I had this feeling of like, I have to get all this stuff done. I have to.
Right.
And if I took a step back and really prioritized, which is what I did after I was completely burnt out, there was a lot of things that did not need to be done at that pace and was hitting diminishing returns. It's kind of like wrapping together everything we've talked about. Yeah. But basically for a large period of time, like I said, I was trying to schedule all day with productive things. And, so I have like a book that I've been working on for a long time, and I might have scheduled 2 or 3 hours for that. Well, if I would have just taken a little bit of time to recognize what my actual priorities were, which is I just want to make progress, like I didn't have a set date for this particular thing. And also recognize that sitting there at the second or third hour was not very productive. Like it just wasn't a good trade-off. So there were also other things that I felt like I had to do, like creating content consistently for different channels and platforms. That didn't produce anything for me, right? Like we've talked about it before, like what are you actually getting out of some of the ways that you invest your time?
Yeah.
A big part of what contributed to my sense of burnout was not prioritizing effectively. So taking a step back and figuring out what's actually important and what actually matters and what you need to do and what the cost is, because trying to get that content out consistently, trying to work on my book a set fairly long period of time on top of a normal job, that was not sustainable. Again, going back to this like small sprints versus like, are you doing this forever? I just was so out of balance. So I think that's another place to really look at and think about is how you're prioritizing things. Because, in this last year, for example, with things having changed so much, trying to keep all of those plates spinning when some of them may not be valuable at all is really worth taking a second look at, especially if you're feeling, some of those symptoms of burnout. You feel like you're not being yourself, or your relationships are impacted, or you're acting in ways that aren't aligned with your values. I think those are all different ways to start considering what adjustments you can make.
Absolutely. Yes. I totally agree, because prioritization is really critical, because it's like, there always is going to be a million things you could do, and not everyone can do a million things at once. We can only do one thing at one time. And so we really have to be mindful of what that thing is that we choose to do. And we talked about this in the last episode about looking at your values, and yeah, you have several values too, but you can't put all the same equal amount of energy into each one. You got to really pick which is at the top of the list, and what are the actions that are in line with that top value, what feeds into those, versus trying to like do everything and anything, and just having that ranking of different values and task and importance that can really make a difference and kind of relieve the burden in a lot of ways, because you're focusing on, then you feel like productive. If you're just focusing on like 2 or 3 things at a time versus like 10 things, but those 2 or 3 things are really feeding into what's important to you at this time in your life, then you feel like, oh wow, I actually got something done. And I think that makes a difference, instead of feeling like that, having that feeling of like, I never get anything done. I feel like I'm never getting enough done. But if you get like 2 things or 3 things of like that, something that's really important, then it's like, yeah, I made progress in that thing that matters to me. And that's can really shift your brain about your idea of how accomplished you feel versus how like unproductive you feel.
Yeah, I think that brings up another topic that I wanted to touch on, which is basically like ways of recharging or ways of not feeling as burnt out. And I think that's a good starting point, which
Mhm.
is there's a difference between getting tasks done because you feel like you need to get them done, and getting
Yeah.
tasks done because they feel like they're worthwhile or that you're actually accomplishing something. And so that's one of the things that I've found to be useful is kind of shifting my day around to make sure that the things that I find valuable get done first and
Mm.
get done before spending time on, going back to what I was talking about before, making sure I work on my book first before doing these content creation type posts, because those don't
Mhm.
feel always that meaningful. But
Right.
the book stuff is, a big project that I want to get done. So I'd be
Mhm.
curious if you have other ways or ideas of kind of not getting to burnout, right? Other ways that we can look at relaxing that are actually useful, as opposed to just, doing all this stuff because we have to do it or feel like that.
Right. Yeah. Well, I mean, kind of feeding into what you were saying about, trying to get that super important task done in the beginning of the day is mirroring kind of what I do in creating like a morning ritual for myself, and really seeing like what are the key things that help me perform, and making that kind of like my ritual. So like having, my meditation and my exercise, setting out my goals for the day, and not overwhelming myself, like 3 realistic goals, but that are still feeding into what I value in life. But then also, like, if I want to generate business, the thing I haven't been consistent with that is really important, then I feel like I procrastinate. But I know I need to put it as like a part of just my morning ritual, is like revenue generating activities, which is like either following up with past clients and being like, hey, checking in, what's up, or reaching out to prospects and saying like, hey, this is what I'm up to, is this something you might be interested in, just like being proactive on the court in those moments. Because like throughout the day I just get caught up, like I'm seeing clients, I'm just like have all these other things, and it just like I haven't been consistent because I'm like, oh, I'll just fit it in when I have time, but then I never have time, so it just doesn't happen. So just like having it done out of the way in the beginning of the day, rather than like, oh, I'll fit it in later when I get to it, and it never happens. So I've created for this year, and again I have to like pull myself. I'm not always like, I fall off the wagon with my morning ritual too. I'm a human being. But I know when I'm consistent with it, it makes such a difference in how I feel. I feel more productive, I feel more clear-minded, and I feel like I just accomplish so much. So it's like getting that thing that's major priority done right off the bat, I think would make a difference for a lot of people in addressing their burnout, and yeah, reframing their mind and really thinking about, okay, what's realistic to get done, not thinking like 10 things at a time, just like focusing on a smaller amount, like 2 or 3 items. I think that shifts our mind and feeling like, yeah, I did good today because I got that 1 or 2 major items, critical items done. Yeah.
Yeah, I think for burnout specifically,
Mhm.
getting your most important tasks done early in the morning or, relatively early compared to whatever other tasks is really useful because it does give you that sense of, I guess, accomplishment or freedom.
Mhm.
I know for me in the past, some of the conversations I've had with other people, the one of the worst things or one of the fastest ways to build up burnout is just feeling like you have these tasks hanging over your head
Mhm.
indefinitely.
Yeah.
Part of that is probably reframing or figuring out what actually needs to be done, but part of
Mhm.
that is also just actually getting the stuff that has to get done
Mhm.
done. So I think what you like talked about is a good way to frame that and start thinking about those ideas. On a related note, I also wanted to talk a little bit about what you think in terms of, let's say that, okay, I looked at my schedule again, I made an hour for myself. Um, to me, there's a big distinction between putting in tasks or not tasks, putting in pieces of relaxation that are actually recharging and putting in just more stuff that kind of seems fake relaxing. I guess it goes back to the conversation we had in the past on self-care versus treating yourself. Um,
Right.
so I'd
TV.
be interested to open that conversation up just a little bit and think about like, what do you think are some of the highest priority things you can put into your time if we open up, some small block, 15 minutes, 30 minutes, an hour? What do we need to put in there?
Yeah, I feel like, in those moments, I think a lot of people want to go into like, oh, I finally have a moment. They'll do things that are not necessarily recharging, like, oh, I'll scroll on my social media, or I'll watch some YouTube videos, or watch some TV. And it's just like, yeah, that's fine. It's like if you got a break, you got some downtime. But if you don't feel recharged after watching a couple YouTube videos, maybe try like taking a moment to just breathe or meditate, or we talked about like lying down for a moment. Sometimes I just need to like breathe and lie down and just not have any stimulus. I guess I just need to like turn off my brain, because I've been like, go go go, and I just like need to not do anything. That's what I need to like reset, recharge, to kind of like slow down, breathe, and then I feel like more energized. Even if it's like 5 minutes, I feel more energized to be like, let's tackle the rest of the day, kind of a thing. And actually, one of the things that I put into my midday is like, I have to take the dogs on a walk or take them to the park. So it's just like dog time midday. And it's just like, it's like good for them. It's good for me. It's like, I'm not on my devices. We're just like being out in nature. And so, yeah, it kind of helps me feel a little more relaxed and be like, okay, now, like, okay, I'm ready to run again, kind of a thing.
Yeah, maybe the core message out of this, because I have a couple things that I do that I'll go over in a second, but maybe the core message out of this is finding the difference between types of tasks for you and whether or not they recharge you. Because I know for me, if I'm, getting some work done and start hitting a wall or whatever, and I take a walk and listen to a book or a podcast or like something informational, that actually gets me recharged. And when I come back, I feel like I kind of have a fresh slate. If I'm at the edge of burnout and having like a terrible time, then I need just like a lay down, quiet, no stimulation whatsoever.
Yeah.
But I know that, even something that seems similar, like watching YouTube videos, even if it's informational content, it's not the same for me. Like that does not charge me up. But
Yeah.
going for a walk and listening to something does. So I think that might be the thrust, is just being able to distinguish between different types of activities for yourself and the things that actually bring you up versus take you down. For a lot of people, I'm going to guess that it's lower stimulation activities. But I also know personally, if I'm hitting a wall and I do some exercise of some sort, even if it's relatively small, that gets me like right back in and ready to go. Like if I, played Frisbee or something for half an hour in the middle of the day, perfect task for me to just like be back and feel fresh and clear and ready to go. But again, there's a huge list of things that I often do that do not fit in that category. And I just feel like the time just kind of goes down the drain and I come back feeling roughly the same.
Yeah. No, that's a really good point, actually. And it reminded me, yeah, there's different types of energy that kind of ramp you up. And yeah, I was talking about when you're feeling at the edge of burnout, where you just need some quiet time for yourself. But actually, I just created, as part of my new routine, of my morning ritual, I actually created like a 2-minute recording of myself, to create the context of my day, where I'm talking about like, I'm powerful, I'm unstoppable, I'm like all these great things, and like, just like to ramp me up, to energize me for the day, because energy makes a difference. If I'm like, and then my day is like, if that's how I start my day. And yeah, usually out of the bed, I'm not super like, yeah, let's take on the day. So I need this 2-minute inspirational like audio of me like ramping myself up to feel like that powerful person, successful person that's taken on life and kicking butt at it. that kind of amps me up. And then like other things that I actually receive training on is just like listening to like personal development books or audiobooks, or, you know, doing some sort of like listening to something that inspires me and excites me. That can kind of switch my mood and energy. So then I feel like, oh yeah, this is why I'm doing it. When I feel like drudge and burnout, I'm like, oh yeah, no, this is why this is motivating. Yeah, so listening to things that are motivating and inspiring can like drive that energy up too. So yeah, I think it's important to assess which phase of the cycle that you are on. Just like one thing I wanted to mention, just from a doctor's perspective, is like this thing called adrenal fatigue, which is kind of like a burnout essentially, where our adrenal glands are responsible for shooting out our hormones, cortisol, like going. But the thing is, it's like if you are constantly shooting out cortisol, eventually your adrenal glands are like, I'm tired. And then it's like slowly spewing out the cortisol because it's been doing this for like way too long. And it just like, now it's like, it's like little crawl. And so, yeah, we need to restore and reboost our adrenal glands. And one of the ways that we can do that is just like taking that time to rest. And it's important to know where you're at. Like one of the things that I do with my clients is that I do adrenal lab testing that's measuring your cortisol at various levels. And so it's important to know which spectrum that you're on. So for some people, if they're like going in that like high cortisol level, like they have super high cortisol all day long. Normally a healthy cortisol level, like it starts out high in the morning and then it tapers off through the day. But if it's like high all day long, it's like, that's the sign we need to calm down your adrenal glands. You got to soothe and calm. We don't want to amp them up when they're already like super amped up. But on the flip side, there's this other thing, the adrenal fatigue side, where you've been going for so long, then your cortisol's like flatlined all day long. And that's when we need to like support our adrenal glands to like boost them up. So it's good to know which side that you're on, and that's helpful to have like lab testing to know that.
Yeah, that's really cool. That's not something that
fun fact.
But yeah, like it's definitely nice to have kind of a medically based basis for what actions you choose to take. Obviously, I don't know which goes to which, but that's definitely something worth, I think, looking at and investigating and figuring out, because the closer you are to the root of the problems between, you know, whatever's going on in your head and whatever's going on in the rest of your body, I think that gives you the best position from which to kind of make your future decisions and figure out the path to actually getting things back together.
Right. Yeah, totally. Yeah. Great. Well, I think we covered this topic pretty well. Was there anything else you wanted to add?
I think that's pretty much all of it. That's all the thoughts rolling around in my brain.
Awesome. Well, thank you everyone for watching, and we'll see you next time. Thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like it and then go and subscribe to my channel and ring the bell so you get notified when the next video comes out. And if you check out in the description below, go to my website where you can get my free fast and easy guide to stress relief. Thanks again for checking us out, and we'll see you next time.